Stuck inside my mind in this quarantine house. The light at the end of the tunnel isn't in sight. Where do I go to find someone to talk to about all of my wants? You can never validate, show me the light. I searched until nothing just better and list online. Still I'm anxious and depressed and my coping skills are not fine. We were drifted and it felt like a waste of time. I heard an interview and I felt an instant connection. I learned CAT, DVD, and my book skills and each and every session. I'm going through, ready to ask the next question. The next question. The next question. The next question. The next question.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider making a donation to the podcast via Venmo to the username @NQCATX. Hello, and welcome to NextQuest podcast, where I ask your potential therapist questions so you don't have to. I am your host, Noah S. Garcia, licensed professional counselor supervisor.
And I'm your new co-host, Amanda Justice, representing all the potential therapy clients out there.
And today, we welcome to the show Arielle Sokoll-Ward, licensed clinical social worker, who will be speaking about her practice in an area of specialty, grief, loss, and trauma. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
So to get us started, what are your credentials and experience?
So I am a licensed clinical social worker. I am also a complex clinical trauma practitioner, and sometimes it's seen as complex trauma practitioner. And I love trauma and grief, and it's my cup of tea, which is strange to say, but I really do love it. And I have a background in working with a lot of different populations. My first job in the social work field was with the mentally ill unhoused population. I have experience working with the domestic violent offender and victim population. I most recently, before my practice that I'm currently doing, I was working in an eating disorder treatment facility at the IOP level of care and the PHP level of care. And I really love that. But since COVID really started, I needed a shift. So I joined a group practice, Moonstone Counseling Center. And since August, 2020, I have started my own private practice as well. Thank you. And I specialize in grief and trauma. I am EMDR trained, and it really is what I love to do. I have a lot of passion for what I do and a lot of gratitude for it.
What is the name of your practice?
Simple to the point. It's just my name, Arielle Sokoll-Ward, LCSW PLLC. So it's
cool.
you know it when you see it.
Okay. So at your practice, do you accept insurance? If so, which ones? And if not, why not?
I do accept insurance. I take insurance through other platforms. So I'm currently taking insurance through Headway. which I am with Oscar, Aetna, United, and Blue Cross Blue Shield. I am not currently accepting clients for Blue Cross Blue Shield anymore. I have quite a few clients that take Blue Cross Blue Shield, but currently not accepting anymore due to the challenges with the insurance company.
Yes.
So, but I want to be, accessible to people. And I have, a certain number of slots for insurance seeking or insurance using clients, and then for private pay as well.
Okay, cool. Do you have a sliding scale or reduced fee that you can offer clients?
I do not, because I take insurance. I don't.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who do and don't, so gotta ask. It's a point of contention among many people. Do you have weekend or evening appointments available?
I don't work weekends. Generally, the last client I see is at 5. So nothing under that. Every now and again, I'll see a client on, a Sunday or a Saturday, but that usually would just be for, a particular situation.
Gotcha. Okay. Are you currently seeing clients via telehealth, in person, or a combo of both?
I am just telehealth right now. And I can imagine myself at some point, maybe later on this year, being in an office once or twice a week, but I really do enjoy being, virtual. And what's kind of strange is that I've actually never met any of my clients in person.
Yeah, it's so weird. There's people I've worked with for over a year now, and I've never met in person. And
Yeah.
it's also interesting to me that there are people who have been trained as therapists who have never met with people in person. I think that's so interesting. Okay, so is being a therapist your first career? If not, what was?
Very much my first career. I feel very grateful that I found a first career that I love so much. That being said, as many therapists know, social workers and LPCs, maybe more so social workers, but it's a journey to get here. You usually do a lot of stuff you don't really love to do. You definitely don't get paid enough. Maybe doing some things that you would have never done before, but you just needed the hours, the clinical hours. So as I said, worked with many populations that I wouldn't choose to work with again. But it got me to where I am, which is, therapy.
Yeah. What was it that drew you to being a therapist and started you down that path?
So I remember having a very memorable conversation with a professor who was also, I want to say for at least one semester, my advisor in college. And I went to Towson University. I got my degree in family studies, which basically means that you're going to grad school, and you're, a lot of people either go from that program, go to get a social work degree or a counseling degree. Not everyone, but most people. And at the time, I was looking at a counseling program through Johns Hopkins, and I was looking at a social work program through University of Maryland. At the time, the University of Maryland was a better program. And I say at the time because I haven't checked numbers recently. But in this conversation I had with my professor, she was a social worker. And she said, what do you want to do? Or, at the end of this, what do you want to do? And I think I said therapy, because that has always been kind of on my mind. I was like, but I mean, I don't know, could be something else. I don't know yet. And she's like, well, you might have more opportunity with social work. You can be a therapist as a social worker, but you can also do this and you can also do that, and maybe in ways that a counseling degree wouldn't be beneficial in or help you in. I do think that has changed over the years. I think it's more kind of equalized now, and everyone, if you can be a social worker and do X, then you could do the same thing with an LPC. But at the time, maybe it was different. So I ended up
except for maybe medical social work.
That's true. That is true. Yeah.
And also LPCs still can't accept Medicare either. So there's that too.
I did not know that.
Only LCSWs and psychologists. Yeah. It's an age old thing and they have not changed it. Yeah.
Huh. I didn't know that. Okay. Proving me wrong here. Okay. So
I always, whenever anybody comes to me and they're like, hey, I'm thinking about being a therapist, I always push them in the LC direction because I think I still think there's a lot more opportunity. And like, I wish I had done that, but I do, I'm an LPC, but I feel like I'm a social worker at heart.
Yeah. It's, and I think another reason why I chose social work too was because at the time I was really, what I thought I wanted to do was work with the domestic violence population, and maybe go into like policy work around that, because I was very much moved by that. At the end of the day, I chose a clinical track for grad school. The macro track, the policy track, wasn't really my thing. But it definitely, it led me to a place that I found like more of myself in. I feel very drawn to clinical work. And yeah, so that kind of created that road for me. I started doing trauma work, I would say, pretty early on. I mean, my first opportunity, like clinical opportunity, was in college, and I led a parenting class, a court mandated parenting class, which was challenging, which was eye-opening, which was, I mean, clinically life-changing in many ways, because this was in inner city Baltimore. I was the youngest person in the room. I was the only white person in the room. I was the only person without children. And I had this authority, and I had this, like, there's a power differential. And it would, and also, this baby, not even baby social worker. I wasn't a social worker, a baby family studies student. And just really like kind of setting a tone of important things that I want in my practice as a clinician, whether I'm doing therapy or whether I'm doing more community work or whether I'm doing advocacy work. Like, my first experience of that, like, shaped it in, I think, more ways than I have probably given it credit to. But where I am with grief now, being a grief and trauma therapist, really came from my own experiences of grief and trauma, and having this separation of like personal stuff and professional stuff, like being these kind of arbitrary boxes, like because they blend so often, and that has really been the truth for my path and where I'm at.
Yeah, totally. I think it's, I think a lot of what makes a therapist a good therapist is having their own variety and experiences, like life experiences, and like, going through it themselves.
Yeah. And a conversation I recently had, we were talking about transference and countertransference, and, you know, how that plays a part in the therapeutic alliance and therapeutic space. And that, at least when I was in grad school and kind of every place thereafter, it was like, if you're experiencing countertransference, like, something's wrong. This is a problem. You need to fix it. Like, you need to get supervision. You need to get consultation. It was a red flag. When actually, I think transference and countertransference, yeah, it's a tool, and it can be a really, really powerful tool. And I think, because, I mean, if I'm being honest, I probably have countertransference every single therapy session with every single client, because, one, I'm a relational therapist. It's something that's foundationally, I'm a relational therapist. And most clients know why I do this work. They know how I got to this work from my own loss of my partner. And it makes the rapport stronger. It makes the trust stronger, because they know that not only do I come from, you know, a framework of having the knowledge or having the degree or the license or, you know, doing the trainings, but I have the life experience of it. I know what it is like to be in a place that feels like the darkest place of your life with no light in sight. And do I always share the details of that? Not always. But when I have a client that is struggling and they know that I have experienced something similar, it's a totally different dynamic that is, like, within the therapy session that just wouldn't be there without transference and countertransference and that relational standpoint. So
yeah, no, totally. We are on the same page. So tell us a little more about yourself. What are your hobbies, interests, TV shows you're watching, music you're listening to, pets, etc.?
Well, unfortunately, I have no pets. I keep trying to short-term foster, but, you know, people just keep it keeps falling through, you know. I don't know. They keep getting people before me snatching up these dogs. So unfortunately, no pets, but I do love dogs. I am having a challenge, but I can't help it. Watching this reboot of Sex and the City, and it is, I feel like it's really problematic and just trying so hard and very cringy, but I can't not watch it because I'm a huge Sex and the City fan. So I will keep watching it. I am rewatching Ted Lasso because it's the most wholesome show I've ever watched in my life. I recommend everyone to watch it. It talks about mental health. It's just so good. It's so good. I have a very close relationship with my siblings. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. We are constantly talking to each other on our WhatsApp group. I see one of my sisters usually a couple times a year. We try to, like come home at the same times, at least a few of us, to see each other. So I feel very grateful to have that in my life. I am pretty obsessed with EMDR. In my spare time, in my non-clinical time, I read up on EMDR and watch videos, and I just think it's amazing. And I won't shut up about it, so I won't go too much into it right now because it'll just never get me to stop talking. What else? I feel like that's almost a challenging question because the last couple of years it has been so different, obviously, but I have noticed myself finding it challenging to go back into the world, especially right now when it's kind of open, but should it be open? And people aren't wearing a mask, but everyone's still getting sick. So I think we do need to wear a mask. And it's just there's so much unknown. So I've noticed myself finding it difficult to kind of re-enter in a way that I normally would be engaged in. So I'm not doing as much. But I live close to the lake. So I do like walking around the lake a lot. I'm trying to get that vitamin D. So.
Nice.
Yeah.
Can you describe your ideal client for me?
So I think my ideal client would be someone that that has a willingness to be present in therapy. And I say that because what I often see, which is understandable, is that, someone can come to therapy, they can say, okay, I want to start therapy. And then when I'm like, all right, what are we talking about today? They're like, I don't know. I'm like, well, I don't know. It's not me. And someone that wants to at least be curious about, like, okay, how could I potentially maybe look some hard stuff in the face, even if I'm not there and willing to do it right now, but willing to like engage in the space. Part of my spiel when I have a consultation with a client is like, I call myself a validating challenger, and I'm a validation queen, validate you to the moon and back, but I'm going to call you on your shit. Nice. And that's not everyone's style. I'm an Enneagram 8. Another thing about me, which is the challenger, and I can't turn it off. If I'm in therapy, I still can't turn it off. So I'm going to continue to challenge you. And from verbal reports of my clients, like that's how they know me. They know I'm going to do that, and that's why rapport continues to build, because like it's something that they can expect, because it's kind of like innately who I am. So it's not something I need to remember to do, but also I think that can be such an opportunity for growth when I can challenge someone and they know that it's coming from, a caring place, a loving place, because we have that rapport. So someone that is open to being challenged and being called on their shit. I really love working with people that are experiencing grief and loss, and that values, a space that's theirs each week and that they're ready to show up for. And maybe that means just showing up for the appointment, but that this is their space, and a lot of people don't have that space. Even if they have a lot of support in their lives, this is a very particular kind of space. So sees the value in that. And then, and people that have trauma histories that, might be open to new interventions, if they've been in therapy before, such as EMDR, if they haven't tried that. So open, willing, curious, my ideal client.
Now, I know you've talked about EMDR. In addition to that, what modalities do you draw upon, and what sorts of evidence do you rely on to support your treatment of choice? And how do you stay up to date on new information or approaches?
So, so I love EMDR. I have, readings on it. I have signed up for, continuing education things on it. I refer to the literature, whether that be, books, articles, videos, from like the leaders of the practice. I read peer-reviewed research, and I really try to know myself and like know how much I can take on, and how much will fit into my brain. Well, because I also use like other models, and it just can't. I don't want it to be all about EMDR. So some of those other models, like the relational model, so like have the relationship being kind of the determining factor of successful therapy, which a lot of research points to, where, I could be the best trauma therapist in Texas, but if I don't have a good relationship with my client, then it doesn't matter. Also, like this model, like helping clients become aware of how they relate to other people, and the importance of the relationship, and like starting with the therapeutic model and therapeutic relationship, modeling that open communication and listening and empathy and active listening, that being a really important kind of space to come from in therapy. I do a lot of DBT. I'm not formally trained, but I have a lot of experience in it. And I really love DBT because it's all skill-based. So if we can add to like their toolbox that they already have a toolbox ready, but we can add these skills for maybe specific times and just general times, it really makes all the difference, especially when we're talking about grief and trauma, because we want to be able to regulate and not leave someone like an open wound at the end of session.
Yeah.
And have them be able to contain themselves and their world outside of session. And then like sensory motor, somatic experience, I lean on that a bit, kind of like dipping my toe in right now, mostly just with like different exercises and techniques, sometimes at the end of difficult sessions, or when we need to regulate, like asking them to notice certain things, and that being a good way to contain.
Okay.
So one universal experience that we all have at some point, if not several points in our lives, is the experience of grief and loss. This could be grief surrounding the loss of a loved one, or even the loss of the ability to physically do something we used to be able to do. Grief and loss comes in many forms. There is a sense of connectedness in this experience, even though we all experience it differently. Now, there have been many stages of grief models proposed, and I'm just curious what your thoughts on those are.
So I think they all have, they all have benefits. I think now what a common acceptance of this is that they're not necessarily stages, and they're more just, sometimes things that happen in grief. When we think of stages, I think stages kind of feels like linear, and we know it's not. So again, kind of like a general acceptance that I think people have. We've all come to this conclusion. So I think that, when we talk about the general stages of grief that most people know, it's not something that isn't relevant, because I know it has gotten a lot of sometimes like bad publicity. But just taking it like with a grain of salt, like you might stay in one stage for a day, you might stage another for a year, you might go back to some, you might never reach some, and that these are kind of like landmarks, but not necessarily like total stops in your grief journey. There's another model about rituals by Kenneth Daka, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, where it talks about like these 4 rituals that people can connect with their loved one after they die. So there's rituals of transition, rituals of affirmation, rituals of continuity, and then rituals of intensification. And similar. It's not something that happens linearly. It's not something that we absolutely need to do, but it's a model that can be used and talked about like in grief therapy, and would be helpful to someone who's grieving, because rituals in so many cultures, is a big part of the bereavement process and bereavement experience. So kind of bringing that together, in a non-cultural way, but in a universal way, while still honoring the culture, it can be, super helpful. like another practice that we can share with clients or like models of grief, talks about 4 stages of mourning. And which is a bit similar to like the stages of grief, but accepting like the reality of the loss, working through the pain that we feel in grief, adjusting to life without that person anymore in our lives, and then maintaining a connection while still going on to live our life. And again, not something that generally happens linearly. We can feel like we have a good relationship with this now deceased person, and we're back to work, we're living our life, and then all of a sudden, like, we get a trigger, and oh my God, I can't believe this person is out of my life, and we can't really accept the loss all over again. So there's a lot of models to go from, and I think generally it's helpful, just like in maybe all types of therapy, taking more of an integrative approach rather than just this one particular thing.
As Noah pointed out, grief is something that everybody will experience in their life at some point. So why do you think it's the case that people who are not currently experiencing grief tend to receive the grieving with a great deal of discomfort? So, for example, I'm not a person who cries, and I especially don't cry in public. But I recently experienced a loss, and in my grief, I just can't help but cry often and quite publicly at times. I cry at work now. It's just a thing. People often respond to it almost as if I'm taking my clothes off, even though I find most people are incredibly outwardly empathetic over the fact that I'm experiencing grief, as long as they don't have to hold space for the actual emotions that come with it. Why do you think this is the case?
So this is like what I think a lot of people talk about, even outside the grief realm, of like, when someone asks how you are, we don't actually really want to know. We just want I'm good, you, or yeah, I'm fine. Because if we like really tell the person how we are, if we share this amazing day that we're having, then maybe, we're showing off. If we share that we're grieving and it's been a horrible day, then kind of a bummer. And people don't know how to react to that. People don't know. They don't know how to hold that, because they were probably expecting oh, good, you.
Yeah.
So, and it's a challenging balance, because, we want to be able to live that like authentically grieving self life, and feel free to do that, feel safe to do that. And also acknowledging in general, like, others' boundaries, or acknowledging how much they can hold at particular times because of maybe what they're going through. So, if someone is outwardly grieving, it creates this space of discomfort, because it's never talked about, because people quite literally don't know what to do, because this is never something we learned in school. This is never something that's talked about in professional spaces. It's not something, it's a stigmatized thing. We've deemed crying as an issue and a problem, and it's like, you don't share that with other people, when it's a very natural and important and healthy thing to do. So, and this doesn't even have to be with crying. It can just be sharing, like, oh, I'm having such a hard day. I don't know I have this issue. I don't know what to do about it. It's like, sounds like someone else's problem, or like, oh, sounds like you need therapy, like, which yeah, could be true, but it's always like pushed to the side. It's like, oh, well, I don't know what to do with that. So let me just say something good-hearted, but cliche. So, God never gives you anything more than you can handle. Or everything happens for a reason.
They're in a better place.
They're in a better place. Which really means, I don't know why this happened. Or I don't know where they are, but I wish I was there. Like, and it's not real. It's not real. And people have very little tolerance for discomfort to begin with, let alone others' discomfort when we weren't asking for it. But that's life. And unfortunately, this creates a systematic spiral of doom where we can't get out of this. It just continues to be a stigmatized issue. It continues to be something that people don't understand or people don't want to deal with. And we just push it off to people. Sounds like you should talk to your therapist about that. Or I just take a bubble bath when you get home.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to talk to you about this. I don't want to listen. Because maybe you don't need to have the right thing to say. You just need to be.
Yeah.
But people don't know that because it's not talked about.
Yeah.
So another curious question. What are some aspects of grief in which you see a lot of commonalities in people's experiences of grief, as well as some places in which people may tend to diverge in this?
So generally, a very common experience is experiencing guilt, loneliness. People will bargain in different ways, which is one of the identified stages of grief. We don't often feel understood. Self-destruction is very common, anger, acknowledging that there are many unknowns. And, what can happen here is that when we have one unknown, we can start being more aware of all the other things that are unknown that maybe we were somewhat tolerating or okay with, or maybe we didn't. It wasn't really in our awareness, but all of a sudden now we're in a spiral of overwhelm because this one very big unknown happened and we can't deal with the minor things in our life, or the tolerance to discomfort, to inconvenience is significantly decreased. So when we have these commonalities, it's kind of interesting because especially with things like guilt or loneliness, or not feeling understood, these things can be very isolating. At the same time, we don't necessarily want to be understood. We think we do. We're very sad that we're not. And when given the opportunity, we want to think that our grief is special. Our grief is bigger. Our grief, yes, I lost my dog and this person lost their dog, but my dog, I've had them for so much longer. So it's not the same. And the reality is that you're right, it isn't the same, because no grief is the same, no matter what it is. However, it becomes like a battle, like a pissing contest kind of, and it's like a weird paradox that happens in grief. And so I think we often will see with certain personalities, I think the language around this used to be in men experience grief in this way, women experience grief in that way. Gender stereotyping and, going with only two genders, I don't find that to be very helpful. So I think with certain personalities, so thinking back to DBT, for example, people that have more of that reason brain rather than the emotional brain, we tend to see people maybe throwing themselves into work or things that they can control, or trying to avoid, or trying to be strong because we might be told that crying, that's not productive at all. So why would I cry? It's not going to bring them back. So why would I cry? And very, very reason oriented and order oriented. And with other people that maybe have more of that emotion brain and are more in touch with feelings and maybe are more okay with those exhibits of emotion, whatever that may be, we might see those people be the first ones to line up for therapy, maybe express their emotions in different ways, through like creative ways, whether it's through art, whether it's through writing, speak to others on it, and not having that fear of judgment so much. And it doesn't mean the fear of judgment isn't there, for anyone, but I think it depends really on, really so much, but like the type of personality you have. But again, the type of job, like if you're working in a mental health treatment center, people might be more understanding of grief and hard days than if you're working at a law firm, because of just and two very different environments, feeling very different in those environments, and what is accepted there, and what is accepted in your life, and in your family and your culture. And there's many different ways that this can, the qualities of grief can show up or not show up, for people.
Okay. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. What has been your own personal experiences with grief? And is there any relationship between your own experiences to your passion in working with people on this?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, what really got me into grief work and the trauma work that I do is going through my own. So in 2015, my partner Drew passed away on March 6th, and he overdosed on heroin. And this created a very difficult space, and kind of a very particular space, because when this happened, I was in grad school to become a social worker, to become a therapist. And I think that there's this misconception, which I kind of find funny, that therapists, because we either show through modeling or psychoeducation or can hold space, we see that maybe there's some assumptions that we do that for ourselves when we're not the therapist in the therapist role.
Right,
and
yeah.
Untrue,
Yeah, very much so.
I know all the DBT skills by heart. I could name all of them. Do I do them? No, because throwing a damn fit feels so much better, and so sometimes I choose to do that. So going through this time, and again, not even, I don't think there were any classes. Actually, that's probably not true. There probably was a class, I just didn't take it. But I wasn't learning about grief. I wasn't learning about bereavement. I wasn't learning about, how to hold that space for a client, let alone how to go through it myself. Again, it's not taught. And I constantly imagine, what if DBT skills were taught in elementary school? Or what if grief was just a normal topic of conversation? How different human beings would be. But that's another spiel. So
I think that about boundaries and assertiveness as well.
Yes. Yes. It's and that if people knew that boundaries helped relationships,
right,
and weren't just walls. Boundaries and walls are two very different things. But yeah, if we just had more psychoeducation in the world, we'd be unstoppable. But alas. So I was going through this extreme loss. And really my first inkling, maybe, that I thought I could do something in more of a clinical sense with this was only about 3 months after he died, when I started a chapter of GRASP, which is Grief Recovery After a Substance Passing, which is a national organization like support groups, and there wasn't any support group in where I was living, which is kind of crazy, in Baltimore, but here we were. And I was in Howard County in Columbia, Maryland, where I grew up. I moved back home for a while after that time. And the therapist I was working with actually introduced me to like the organization, and because we were both looking for something, because I wanted to do some group work. And through becoming a facilitator and a group member, which is also kind of an interesting role, I saw that like I could make a difference, and that I enjoyed and I found purpose in this, because especially working with that therapist who was amazing, but I was like, oh my God, how could you do this? How could you be a grief therapist? Like, ugh, so much work. What a bummer. And somehow finding this true purpose in it. And like, even when I wasn't doing that work, always coming back to it somehow. Like when I was doing the case management with the unhoused mentally ill population, like always coming back to some type of like therapeutic clinical work around trauma, around grief. So I felt like it was just kind of like in my blood at that point. And so much of who I am personally shows up professionally for me. And so much of who I am professionally is who I am personally. So it's not very separate for me in I think a really beautiful way, and not so much a poor boundary way.
Yeah. So the fact of the matter is that loss can be traumatic and devastating. What are your thoughts about the relationship between grief and loss and trauma?
So as far as your brain, grief and loss is a trauma. And when we experience a significant loss, I mean, our brains react in very similar ways than when we experience a significant trauma. And I don't think you can really be a grief therapist without being trauma informed. I personally think no matter what kind of therapist you are, you should be trauma informed. But
Totally.
But coming from that like perspective, like knowing trauma work, knowing trauma modalities, because it's traumatic. And similar to other traumas, if we don't identify it, if we don't focus on it, we won't heal from it. And it also doesn't go away. So facing it is, I mean, a huge part of I think the work that we do in therapy, and that can be like baby steps, or I mean, just showing up in session. I mean, as I said, like my ideal client like shows up for themselves, and maybe it's really like the only way they can show up for themselves is logging into the session, and that's it. But that shows they made a choice to like be in the space that they know is for them, which when someone is traumatized or someone is experiencing intense grief, like that is a huge and very, very difficult step. So I think there are many, many parallels. And similarly to trauma, I don't think you can really be a true trauma therapist without doing grief work. So I think they're hand in hand.
Totally agree, but 100%.
In your TED Talk, you say that grief is a cocktail of fear, uncertainty, and loneliness. Grief seems to be such a personal journey. No one can experience your grief with you, which seems to compound the loneliness. How do you treat someone dealing with grief while acknowledging that while you can hold space for the loneliness, there's really no way for them to escape it?
So I think there's like this assumption or hope that therapy will provide someone with the way to stop the hurt or get over the loss. And it doesn't. I wish I often say, I wish I had that magic pill. I wish I had that magic thing to say that would take away all this pain, take away all this hurt. But I don't, because it doesn't exist. So like, I think that there are some assumptions that can be made about grief that we might, sometimes feel for a day, we might feel for years, but like we generally will feel this loneliness, at least at some small part of the grief journey, if not for a lot of the grief journey. And, what I was talking about before, like it's a weird paradox of like being so lonely and feeling like we have this specialness to our experience, where we don't really want people to understand, because if they do, then we might think that then it wouldn't be worthy, or we wouldn't be worthy of the impact that we feel. So then it leads us into this cyclical like spiral of, actually isolating ourselves from opportunities to find connection. So if we feel like there's not room for us, and that we're a burden because we're experiencing grief, then we will continue to hide it and really hide from our own grief, which doesn't stop it. It really just, makes it louder and louder and louder until it comes out one day and it's not in our control at all. And I think therapy can be a space that we can either like let it come out a little bit, we can let it come out a lot, but an identified safe space for it to come out and not feel so scared about it, and know that if we let it out, it doesn't solve everything, but it is part of the process that, needs to happen.
Yeah.
So.
You also say that we can learn resilience by learning to connect with and allowing ourselves to experience our grief, that we should think about the future. And in grief, we are stuck in the present and the past. But in the peak of our grief, the future feels like such a bleak place, devoid of, exactly what we're feeling the grief about, what we've lost. And it's not really a place we want to be. How do you find hope in a future that isn't somewhere you want to be? How do you guide your client in finding their sense of purpose?
So Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, who's like one of the leading people in trauma work, he talks about the importance of imagination, and that when people are severely traumatized, we lack this ability to imagine a better life, a healed life. And similarly to grief, like when our entire world is coming down, it wouldn't make sense to innately be, you know what, I'll get over this. Like, because it feels like there's no getting over, and we can't imagine anything else than what is impactful right now. Like I sometimes think about it in the sense of of like stimulation. If we're overstimulated, then we feel the impact of that. We feel generally outside our window of tolerance. So we need to get back to our window of tolerance, and we need to manage that stimulation. So we think of, well, when I get home, I know I can go to sleep and it will be, I'll finally, get to rest my body. Or I'm so freezing right now, but when I get home, I have so many blankets I can get under. Like, we can imagine ourselves in these situations, which can, again, cyclically, like, help us get back into even like the middle of our window of tolerance, and not so much like just barely in. So with grief and loss, it's very, very hard to imagine the future. However, if we can't imagine the future, and we can't imagine ourselves in a different spot than where we're at, we won't be able to get there. So I try to help my clients like get to a more like through curiosity and through like finding this resilience that maybe has been hiding, maybe we didn't even know existed. We can think about, what could tomorrow look like? Can you imagine yourself in different clothes than you're in right now? Could you imagine, I mean, like starting very, very small, but we feel this heavy challenge because it's the heaviness of the grief. And we feel, I mean, like like frozen in it, which again could be the freeze response, again relating it to trauma. So just helping them know that like the future is not going to look like today, and the reality is that we don't know what it will look like. But if it was anything other than what it looks like today, what could it look like? And just like maintaining that curiosity, I think, is the key.
Okay.
All right. What message would you like to send to anybody out there who may be listening that is currently struggling with some grief?
So I would say that you are allowed to make a big deal out of things that you care about. You're allowed to feel big feelings. Again, not something that is often validated. That guilt is a part of grief, and guilt actually has a purpose, which is there's three really main reasons why we have guilt. One is that we actually did something wrong. One is that we feel like we did something wrong. And one is that it creates order. And I think in grief, most often it's that third one, where if we feel guilt for something, if we have self-blame, then it gives a reason to something that doesn't have an answer, because it's very, very hard to tolerate knowing that things happen that are outside of our control, that freak accidents happen. So knowing that like the guilt that you're probably feeling is normal and will go away with the right work, and that hiding from your grief won't change it or make it go away. And that grief is a weird paradox of, we have to feel bad in order to feel better.
Yeah. Good message. I love it. So going back to you as a therapist, what kind of experience do you have working with particularly vulnerable clients, such as those who are transgender, undocumented, or BIPOC, to name a few examples?
I've a lot of experience. About half my clients, I would say right now, are people that identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community. I am and have in the past worked with a handful of trans clients that I feel like is work that is not talked about enough. The importance of the work and the importance of the knowledge around holding space for people that could possibly even be thinking of that identity for themselves. Because just because we're not currently working with someone that is trans doesn't mean that we won't ever, or that even one of our current clients couldn't identify that in the future. So,
or that one of your current clients is trans and you don't know it.
Yeah.
I've worked with trans people before who have withheld their gender from their therapist for fear that they would focus on that when that was not the focus of therapy in any way, shape, or form. So that says a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And if there was, more willingness and acceptance, even in the therapeutic community, again, like the changes that we would see and the growth that we would see in, and not only therapists, but our clients and in the space itself. I try my absolute hardest to work from a perspective that is inclusive and is anti-racist and has an open door policy, I call it, quote, open door policy of, if something is bothering you, this is a safe space to bring it up. And by bothering you in the therapy space, or if I said something you feel like I shouldn't have, or any type of discomfort within our relationship, having and building a good rapport with people who might be different than I am in many ways, not feeling unsafe to bring that up. And I think that comes with practice to create that space for someone.
Sure, for sure. Thanks for bringing that up. I totally agree, but that's just me, you know. So, what could a new client expect from you in an initial session? And what about on an ongoing basis?
Just funny because I am changing this this year. I've decided to make a change to it because the first session for me, I know a lot of people do like an intake session. I never really saw my practice doing like an intake session before. It was more so just like I try to keep things pretty chill. So it's like a casual type of intake, I guess. You know, I might ask them, so like what brings you to therapy now? So not only what brings you to therapy, but why now? And I might have asked that, you know, on the consultation call. If they don't really know how to answer that, or if they feel uncomfortable, then I have, you know, a set of intake-like questions that I can ask them in that first session. And it's really just building rapport. It's, you know, them getting to know me and my style and the space that I potentially can provide for them, and them getting to know sometimes what therapy is. Sometimes people haven't been to therapy. So it's like sometimes psychoeducation on like, this is the space and this is what it will look like. And then me getting to know them and not only
Laying the foundation.
Yeah. Not only like what we're going to do in this space and why they're here, but also just who they are as a person, what makes them them. And then ongoing, kind of similarly, like rapport is always being built, but I generally like to have an expectation, again, stating this in the consultation call, like if I'm working, you're working. And
I'm not going to work harder than you.
And exactly. And I'm not working harder than you. Like you learn that in grad school and you keep it with you. So if I feel like I'm working harder than you, I will let you know. I am very transparent. And I'm also someone that will call you on your shit. And that doesn't change over the sessions. So I have, they know what to expect.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I always tell my clients in the initial session, like, I'm going to call you on your shit. Like, you know, it doesn't help you to keep doing the things that you've always done that end up with the same results that you've always gotten. You know, it's just, let's break that cycle.
Yeah.
And, you know, gentle, you do it in a gentle, you know, compassionate way. You don't have to be a dick about it, but, but, you know, I think it's important to challenge people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you determine your client's treatment plan goals, and how will I know that I'm done with therapy?
Okay, so this is a fun question because I think treatment plans are so dumb. I hate them. And if I never made another one for the rest of my life, I think every client that I've ever worked with will be fine. However, it's part of my ethics and it's part of working with insurance, and it's a pain in the ass because I feel like sometimes treatment plans forget that they're for human beings and that human beings are dynamic. And especially when you're doing grief and trauma work, there are going to be days where that's what we're working on. And that's why we've come to therapy today. And that's what we're doing. And that's what it says in the treatment plan. And then something else happened. Then, you know, someone gets fired, which we can say, sure, it's another loss. But if the loss that we were working on was, you know, the loss of a person's mother 5 years ago, the treatment will look very different than a loss for a job. Also, let's say, you know, there's primarily like an eating disorder diagnosis and we're doing, you know, that work. And then all of a sudden someone's mother dies. We're not just gonna be like, you know, it's not in the treatment plan. So we're just gonna have to like put this on the shelf. And once we're done with this issue, then we'll move on to the next issue. Like that's not how human beings work. And it doesn't provide flexibility because we also can't totally change the treatment plan because we still need to do the eating disorder work, you know? So it's challenging. I almost all of the clients that I have that I'm working with right now, I've worked with for close to a year, if not more. There are a few clients that are, I would say, I think I have one client under 6 months, but other than that, like they're all kind of longer term. And I think a lot of people use therapy as just, even if nothing is particularly bothersome, it's, a place that's theirs, that they can, decompress and they can process every week. So even if we kind of complete the treatment plan or we complete the treatment they originally came for, not like there's always something more, but there's so many more ways to use the therapeutic space. I like to leave termination not totally up to the client, but model me trusting the client, modeling that they can trust themselves to make decisions, and especially about their treatment, and that they are part of that treatment team. Now, if I feel like there's some like dependency, like I will call that out and remain curious about that. Like what do you think is keeping you here? And maybe encourage, let's do every other week. Let's do once a month. And generally what tends to happen is that people like find the insight, like, I've actually been pretty okay. Maybe I can go down to once a month, or maybe I just call you when I need a session.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, sounds great. So I think you'll know you're done with therapy when you want to be done with therapy. Like maybe that's like a cop-out answer, but I do really believe in encouraging clients to trust themselves.
Okay.
And clients being their own expert.
Yes. Yeah.
We see eye to eye on a lot of things here. How do you define holding space for someone?
I think it's all about mindfulness, where it's a emotional holding space involves your body, involves your emotions, involves nonverbal cues, sometimes verbal cues, but it is, it's a look. It's not being afraid of silence. It's not, it's, acknowledging the rapport that has been and continues to be built and maintained through every session, and using that as a tool, and trusting that as a tool, where if there's silence, there's probably processing happening, and it's not just nothing. And I think a therapist that is good at holding space will realize that, and not be afraid of that, and not be afraid of the silence. But there's a feeling that I think the client will get, because if we've been in therapy, like we know that feeling, like we feel heard when we're not saying anything. That's holding space.
Good answer. I like it. What do you do to take care of yourself? And is there one thing after a particularly hard day that you just gotta be sure to do?
I realize after difficult days, I am talking to one of my siblings more. So I think, and sometimes I talk about the session, sometimes I talk about nothing to do with the session. But so connecting with people I love. I have different shows that I like to watch and know, like, okay, am I in a space to watch this, or am I in a space to watch that? Do I need some Ted Lasso, or do I need some Law and Order SVU? Like it's being mindful of that. I really love cooking. I like exercising, sitting all day. Like I need some joyful movement in my life. As I said, being so close to the lake, I like being able to just get outside and walk and get fresh air. I think after a particularly hard session, I've written after that. I one thing I did the other day, which I've never done before actually, is I went outside on my patio and turned on, I have like some Christmas lights. So I turned on those and I put on some like quiet music, and I colored in my coloring book, which I have, and I've only used it a couple of times, but it was just it was like a really beautiful night. And it was really great because I noticed that a lot of things I do for self-care might involve some type of like stimulation or some type of screen. So it was nice. I mean, I guess I had music, but it was nice to use a different part of my brain.
Yeah, no, that sounds lovely. Okay, next question. How would you define happiness?
So I tried to really think about this before, but I think happiness is finding gratitude in hard situations. I have a mantra that I don't know when I started kind of telling this to myself, but it's I'm happy because I'm grateful, and I'm grateful because I'm happy. And that just being a cycle that I truly feel, and using that as even a tool if I'm having a really hard day, if I'm feeling really angry, trying my best to just identify one thing I'm grateful for. And it starts like a train of that. And for me, it changes my mood. So I know that those two things like go hand in hand together for myself. But I also, I think happiness is also feeling like you're living out your values and that you accept contentness. Because I think sometimes contentness gets like a bad name, like never be content.
Not to be confused with complacent.
Exactly. And contentness is underrated. Like, it feels good, especially after like, a hard day. But I think that's what happiness is.
Good definition. Well, is there anything else that you think would be good for a potential client or other therapists to know about you and your practice?
I have a book coming out recently.
I forgot to ask about the book. Yes, tell us about the book.
And so the book is called Adding the E, which a lot of people ask about the title, but I can't tell you why it's the title until you read it, because then you'll know. But it's Adding the E, Perspectives of Grief through Recounts, Letters, and Poetry. I talk about, in the first half, I talk about my experience losing my partner, my experience with my partner, and that's told through a narrative and through letters I wrote to him after his death, and poetry written between 2013 and 2021. And the second half of the book is more clinical. It talks about some psychoeducation. I share some client stories, and I share research that I have done over the last couple of years, qualitative research about other people's experiences of grief, and showing some commonalities, and hopefully people can get some education and therefore feel not as alone and have a bit more self-compassion. So I'm really, really proud of it. I'm really excited. And it's available February 8th.
Sweet. I'm super excited to check it out. Will it be on Amazon or where can people find it?
So right now it's available for pre-order through my publisher's website. And if you go on my website, there's a link to it. There's a whole page about the book. So you can find it there. But it will be on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, all those, retailers, and internationally as well. So I'm excited that people will be hopefully be reading it in Spain. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for having me.
The next question. The next question. The next question. The next question.
Thank you for listening to Next Quest podcast. We learned something new today and hope you did too. Stay tuned to our episode next week featuring Megan Van Meter, licensed professional counselor, who will be speaking about her practice in an area of specialty, the role of creativity in combating burnout for helping professionals. Next Quest podcast is sponsored by Jan Dimmitt Resources. Save yourself the time and stress of credentialing and let the experts at Jan Dimmitt Resources do what they do best. For over 20 years, Jan Dimmitt Resources has provided administrative support and credentialing services to mental health professionals in Texas and beyond. Visit their website at jandimmitt.com. That is JANDIMMITT.com, or call 512-731-5725 for more information on all the ways they can make running your practice easier for you. Next Quest podcasts rely solely on donations to keep this project going. Please consider becoming a patron on my Patreon page at www.patreon, that's patreon.com/nextquestpodcast, or you can make a one-time donation on my website at www.nextquestcounseling.com/aboutnextquestpodcast. You can also support the podcast by liking our Facebook page. Until next question, this is Noah Garcia signing off.